The sound of helicopter blades slicing through the morning air shattered the peace of Oak Ridge Estates. Deborah Winters stood on her pristine lawn, hands on hips, mouth agape as her neighbor's military surplus helicopter descended onto his front yard. This was the final straw. As head of the Homeowners Association, she could not allow such a flagrant violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the community bylaws. No vehicles shall be parked on any lawn or non-designated parking area. Roger. Deborah screamed over the dying whir of the rotors, her perfectly highlighted bob remaining unnaturally still in the artificial wind. This is absolutely unacceptable. Roger Thornhill, a retired Air Force pilot with a mischievous glint perpetually present in his eyes, climbed out of the cockpit and jumped to the ground with surprising agility for a man in his 60s. "Morning, Deb," he called cheerfully, waving as if landing a helicopter in suburbia was as normal as getting the mail. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Deborah marched across the street, her designer flats crunching on the immaculate asphalt. The other neighbors were emerging from their homes now, smartphones raised to capture what would inevitably become the most discussed next-door post of the year. "You have exactly 10 minutes to remove this monstrosity from your property before I call the towing company," she hissed, thrusting a manicured finger toward the helicopter. "And expect a formal violation notice by this afternoon." Roger's smile never faltered. "It's not in the street, Deb. Check the bylaws. They specify no vehicles on lawns. This is an aircraft." "Don't you check the bylaws, me, Roger Thornhill. I wrote half of them." Deborah's face flushed crimson, clashing horribly with her coral blouse. "Section 12 clearly states that all exterior modifications or additions must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee." "Didn't modify anything, just added a helicopter." Roger winked at Mrs. Abernathy from across the street, who giggled behind her hand like a schoolgirl despite being well into her 70s. Deborah's nostrils flared dangerously. "This neighborhood has standards, Roger, standards that maintain our property values and community aesthetics. Your little stunt is bringing down the entire street." Roger's expression sobered slightly. "Deb, it's temporary. My son's flying in this weekend with his family. He's picking me up for his promotion ceremony at the base. The helicopter stays for 3 days, then it's gone." 3 days? Deborah nearly choked. "Absolutely not. You have until noon. After that, I'm calling Precision Towing." As she spun on her heel to leave, Roger called after her. A darn of a helicopter hooked Deb. "Watch me," she muttered, pulling out her phone and snapping several damning photos from different angles. Back in her home office, a shrine to organizational efficiency with color-coded binders lining built-in shelves, Deborah drafted the violation notice with vicious precision. She'd been HOA president for 7 consecutive years precisely because she understood something fundamental. Neighborhoods needed rules and rules needed enforcers. By 12:30 p.m., true to her word, Precision Towing arrived with specialized equipment. Roger watched in disbelief from his porch as they secured his helicopter for transport, his usual smile replaced with something darker. The gathering crowd of neighbors murmured among themselves, divided between amusement and unease. What Deborah didn't notice was Roger's son arriving in an unmarked van, observing the scene with his father. Nor did she see the knowing look that passed between them or hear their hushed conversation. "Dad, she actually towed your helicopter." "Yep, but don't worry. I've got a little surprise planned for our HOA queen." "The Manure thing? You're not seriously going through with that?" Roger's smile returned, slow and deliberate. "Oh, I am. Operation Fertilizer begins at dawn." Deborah Winters slept soundly that night, the satisfaction of victory wrapping around her like a cashmere throw. The neighborhood had been restored to its proper order. At the crack of dawn, she rose for her daily power walk through Oak Ridge Estates, clipboard in hand to document any new violations that might have sprouted overnight like unwelcome dandelions. Her route always began with a lap around the community park, the crowning jewel of her HOA presidency. The impeccably manicured grass, the regulation height fencing, the children's playground with its non-toxic, sustainably sourced wood chips. All of it a testament to her unwavering leadership. As she rounded the corner by the Hendersons' property, who would be receiving a notice about their unapproved shade of mailbox paint, Deborah spotted something that made her stop mid-stride. Roger Thornhill stood in his driveway, deep in conversation with a burly man in overalls. Behind them sat an enormous truck filled to the brim with what appeared to be. "Is that Manure?" she whispered to herself, quickening her pace. Roger caught sight of her approach and smiled broadly. "Morning, Deb. Beautiful day for some gardening, wouldn't you say?" The smell hit her before she could respond. A pungent, earthy assault on her senses that made her eyes water. "What exactly do you think you're doing, Roger?" Section 9, Paragraph 2, he recited with exaggerated formality. "All homeowners are encouraged to maintain ecologically sustainable garden practices." "I'm going organic, Deb." 100% natural fertilizer for my new vegetable garden. There is no approved vegetable garden in your landscaping plan, she countered, already pulling up the community guidelines on her phone. Actually, Roger produced a folder from behind his back. Here's my approved modification request from last month's committee meeting, signed by Vice President Thompson himself while you were at your sister's wedding. Deborah snatched the paper, scanning it with growing horror. There it was, official approval for a substantial home garden with appropriate amendments to soil as needed. This is 10 tons of manure, Roger. 10 tons. Soil amendments, he corrected cheerfully. And don't worry about the smell. They'll dissipate in a week or 3. The delivery man cleared his throat. Where would you like it, sir? Before Deborah could intervene, Roger gestured expansively toward his backyard. Just dump it over the fence. My son's bringing some equipment to help spread it later. This is harassment, Deborah hissed, stepping closer to Roger. You're doing this because of the helicopter. His smile never wavered. I'm simply exercising my rights as a homeowner within the clearly defined boundaries of our community guidelines. Isn't that what you're always preaching, Deb? Throughout the day, the pungent aroma of fresh manure wafted through the neighborhood, carried by an unfortunately persistent breeze that seemed to target Deborah's property with particular malice. Her scheduled garden luncheon with the ladies' auxiliary had to be moved indoors, and even then, 3 members made transparent excuses to leave early. By evening, her phone was blowing up with texts and calls from angry neighbors. The HOA emergency line had 17 messages, all variations on the same theme. Make it stop. Deborah sat in her home office, curtains drawn against the offensive smell, drafting an emergency bylaw amendment regarding organic materials and their appropriate use. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. What she didn't know was that Roger's son hadn't just brought equipment to spread the manure. He brought his entire Air Force squadron, all with their own ideas about how to exact revenge on the woman who towed their former commander's helicopter. As night fell, Deborah heard unfamiliar voices and laughter from Roger's backyard. Peering through her blinds, she glimpsed figures moving in the darkness, working with military precision around the mountain of manure. Something about their coordinated movements sent a chill down her spine. Let them have their fun, she muttered, returning to her paperwork. Tomorrow I'm calling in environmental services. But tomorrow would bring challenges that even Deborah Winters, 7-term HOA president and enforcer extraordinaire, couldn't possibly anticipate. Dawn broke over Oak Ridge Estates with an unusual silence. Deborah's alarm chimed at precisely 5:45 a.m. as it did every morning. She rose, stretched, and approached her bedroom window to assess the day's weather before selecting an appropriately seasonal power walking outfit. What she saw stopped her cold. The community park, her immaculate, award-winning community park, had been transformed overnight. From her second-story vantage point, she could clearly make out an enormous pattern carved into the grass with what could only be manure. It formed a perfect helicopter silhouette, visible only from above, with words beneath it reading, "No parkaying anytime." "No," she whispered, fumbling for her phone. No. Her fingers trembled as she dialed Roger's number. It rang 4 times before his cheerful voice answered. "Good morning, Deb. Early riser as always, I see. What have you done?" Her voice emerged as a strangled hiss. "The park is, you've destroyed." "I haven't left my property since yesterday," Roger replied smoothly. "Check your security cameras if you don't believe me. Though I did hear some commotion in the night. Probably those teenagers from Pinacrest Boulevard again." Deborah ended the call without another word. She dressed in record time, forgoing her usual makeup routine in her haste to reach the park. As she power-walked, nearly jogging, down Magnolia Lane, she noticed other early risers emerging from their homes, phones raised skyward. "What are they looking at?" she muttered, glancing up. A drone hovered high above the neighborhood, its small form barely visible against the morning sky. As she watched, it made a slow, deliberate circle over the park before heading toward the community center. Dread pooled in Deborah's stomach. She changed course. The Oak Ridge Estates Community Center housed the HOA offices, meeting rooms, and the neighborhood's pride and joy. An Olympic-sized swimming pool surrounded by meticulously maintained gardens. As Deborah rounded the corner, she saw a small crowd gathered by the pool gate, pointing and laughing. "Excuse me," she commanded, pushing through the onlookers. "HOA president coming through." The crowd parted reluctantly, revealing the source of their amusement. The crystal-clear waters of the community pool now contained dozens of small, floating objects. Upon closer inspection, Deborah realized they were miniature helicopters, bath toys perhaps, each bearing the number of a community bylaw in tiny print. "Who did this?" she demanded, rounding on the gathered neighbors. "This is vandalism of community property." No one answered, though several people seemed to be suppressing smiles. From somewhere in the back of the crowd, Deborah heard a distinct whisper. "Team Roger." Security footage would later reveal nothing. The pool cameras had experienced a technical glitch during the crucial hours, while the park had no surveillance coverage. The drone apparently belonged to no one in the neighborhood, at least no one willing to claim it. By noon, Deborah had convened an emergency meeting of the HOA board in her living room, the community center being temporarily unusable due to maintenance issues. "This is a coordinated attack on our community standards," she informed the 5 board members seated around her dining table. "And I believe Roger Thornhill is behind it all." Vice President Thompson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We don't have any actual evidence of that, Deborah. And some members are suggesting that Tony's helicopter might have been overzealous. Deborah's voice rose dangerously. "I was enforcing the bylaws that every homeowner agreed to in purchasing property in this community." "Perhaps," said Treasurer Williams, a normally quiet accountant who rarely opposed Deborah, "we could consider a more diplomatic approach. Roger has friends in this community, military veterans. People respect him." Deborah's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting I don't have the community's respect?" The uncomfortable silence that followed told her everything. A notification chimed on multiple phones simultaneously. Board members glanced down at their screens, eyes widening. "What now?" Deborah snapped. Secretary Jenkins wordlessly turned her phone toward Deborah. On the screen was a community-wide email announcement. "Special flight demonstration. Tomorrow at dawn. Courtesy of your neighbor, Roger Thornhill." Sleep evaded Deborah that night. She tossed and turned, imagining increasingly catastrophic scenarios for Roger's promised flight demonstration. By 4:30 a.m., she abandoned all pretense of rest and sat by her bedroom window, scanning the pre-dawn neighborhood for signs of activity. Oak Ridge Estates slumbered peacefully beneath a canopy of stars, streetlights casting pools of yellow light on empty sidewalks. Nothing stirred, not even the usual early morning joggers or dog walkers. The silence felt ominous, as if the entire community were collectively holding its breath. At 5:15 a.m., headlights appeared at the neighborhood entrance. Not just one vehicle, but a procession of them. Cars, trucks, and SUVs, moving slowly with dim lights. They parked along the main boulevard, and dark figures emerged, converging on Roger's property. Deborah grabbed her phone and robe, hurrying downstairs. She hesitated at her front door, uncertain whether to venture outside or call community security. Before she could decide, her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw Gerald Thompson, HOA vice president, and increasingly, it seemed, a traitor to her cause. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, opening the door just enough to glare at him. Gerald had the decency to look sheepish in his plaid pajama pants and windbreaker. "Thought you might want some moral support. Everyone's heading to the park for the demonstration." Everyone. The whole neighborhood, more or less. Even the Hendersons. And they never leave their house before noon. Deborah's jaw tightened. "So you're all just going along with the circus? Have none of you considered that whatever Roger's planning could violate county noise ordinances, airspace restrictions, safety regulations?" Gerald shrugged. "Maybe. But I'd rather be there to witness it than miss the excitement." Coming? 20 minutes later, Deborah stood at the edge of the community park, watching with growing horror as neighbors arrived in droves. Someone had set up a refreshment table with coffee and donuts. Children were being lifted on their parents' shoulders for better viewing. The atmosphere was festive, like a spontaneous block party. "This is a nightmare," she muttered to no one in particular. Roger stood in the center of a group of men, his military buddies, presumably, gesturing animatedly toward the eastern sky. When he spotted Deborah, he broke away and approached with that infuriating grin. "Deb, glad you could make it." "Front row seat for the HOA president," he said, guiding her toward a hastily erected viewing area with folding chairs. "You'll want to be comfortable for this. Whatever you're planning, Roger, I will personally ensure that you face the maximum penalties allowed under our community guidelines," she hissed. "Wouldn't have it any other way," he replied cheerfully. "Oh, look, here they come." The distant sound of helicopter rotors cut through the morning air. Heads turned skyward as 3 military helicopters appeared on the horizon, flying in tight formation. They circled the neighborhood once, then hovered over the park. A crowd erupted in cheers. Roger lifted a radio to his lips. "Alpha Team, you are cleared for Operation Fertilizer. I repeat, cleared for Operation Fertilizer." Deborah watched in stunned disbelief as small objects began dropping from the helicopters, hundreds of them, floating gently downward on tiny parachutes. As they descended, she realized they were miniature scrolls tied with red ribbon. A child near her caught one, unfurling it excitedly. "It's the HOA rules," he shouted. "But they're all crossed out and it says Roger's rules instead." Before Deborah could process this affront, Roger's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Ladies and gentlemen of Oak Ridge Estates, please direct your attention to the Henderson property for the main event." All eyes turned toward the large, empty lot behind the Henderson home. the only undeveloped property in the neighborhood, which Deborah had been fighting to turn into a decorative fountain installation. The helicopter's reposition hovering directly above it. "No," Deborah whispered, suddenly understanding. He wouldn't dare. "Ladies and gentlemen," Roger's voice crackled through the megaphone, "what you are about to witness is the inaugural planting of the Oak Ridge Estates Community Garden." The crowd murmured in confusion. Deborah blinked rapidly, trying to process his words. A community garden? That wasn't part of any approved plan. She'd specifically rejected 3 separate proposals for such a project, citing concerns about property values and undesirable elements being attracted to growing food. "As you know," Roger continued, "our HOA president has long opposed this project, but thanks to some creative interpretation of Bylaw 14.6, which states that temporary landscape modifications for seasonal community celebrations are permitted without prior approval, we're going to create something beautiful together." Deborah lunged for the megaphone. "That bylaw refers to holiday decorations, and you know it." Roger deftly sidestepped her. "Today marks the first day of spring, a seasonal celebration observed worldwide for thousands of years. And what better way to celebrate than by planting?" The crowd cheered, drowning out Deborah's protests. Someone handed Roger a tablet, which he used to tap out a command. Above them, the helicopter's cargo bays opened. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Thousands of small, biodegradable pouches cascaded from the helicopters, raining down upon the Henderson lot. Each pouch, Deborah would later learn, contained a different variety of wildflower seeds, vegetable starts, or herbs embedded in, of course, compressed manure. The crowd gasped collectively, then erupted in applause. Children pointed excitedly, adults laughed, and several people were filming the entire spectacle on their phones. Through a haze of disbelief, Deborah noticed even Mrs. Henderson herself jumping up and down with glee. "This is illegal," Deborah shouted, though no one seemed to be listening. "This violates at least 17 different bylaws." Roger appeared beside her, somehow having materialized from the crowd. "Actually, it doesn't. We had our lawyer review everything. The Henderson lot is zoned for residential or community use, and they've donated it for this purpose." He handed her a thick stack of papers. "Here's all the documentation, including signatures from 87% of Oak Ridge Estates homeowners approving the project." Deborah flipped through the papers, her hands trembling. "When did you? How did you?" "Been working on it for months," Roger said, his voice gentler now. "Long before the helicopter incident. That just accelerated the timeline. People want this garden, Deb. They want a community space where they can grow things together, teach their kids about nature, share meals." The seed pouches had created a perfect grid pattern across the lot. As the morning sun strengthened, the biodegradable casings were already beginning to dissolve, releasing their contents into the soil. "Your helicopters dumped manure all over Oak Ridge Estates," Deborah said weakly, making one last attempt to assert control. "Technically, it's called aerial seeding with integrated fertilizer," Roger corrected. "Completely legal and surprisingly common in agricultural applications. And it's only on the Henderson lot, which is now officially designated as the Oak Ridge Estates Community Garden." He paused. "Unless some of it drifted, wind can be unpredictable." As if on cue, a slight breeze picked up, carrying with it the unmistakable earthy aroma of manure. Several people wrinkled their noses, but the festive atmosphere remained undiminished. Deborah stood frozen, the papers clutched in her hands, watching as neighbors began to converge on the lot. Someone had brought garden tools. Someone else was setting up a sign-up sheet for plot assignments. The 3 helicopters performed a final victory lap around the neighborhood before disappearing into the morning sky. "I've worked 7 years to maintain standards in this community," Deborah said, her voice barely audible. Roger's expression softened. "Maybe it's time for some new standards." Before she could respond, a small girl approached, holding up one of the seed pouches that had landed near the park instead of the garden plot. "Ms. Winters," the child said hesitantly, "would you like to help me plant these sunflowers?" Deborah stared at the little girl's outstretched hand, the seed pouch resting in her small palm like an offering. Around them, the celebration continued unabated, neighbors laughing, planning, already dividing the newly created garden into sections. The community she had thought she controlled had transformed before her eyes, realigning itself around Roger's vision rather than her own. Deborah began, then stopped, unexpected emotion closing her throat. The girl, Lily Chen from 2 streets over, whose family had received 3 separate notices about their holiday decorations last Christmas, waited patiently, her expression hopeful. Something shifted inside Deborah, a hairline fracture in the rigid framework that had governed her life. She reached out slowly and took the seed pouch. "Yes," she said quietly. "I suppose I could help with that." As Lily led her toward a patch of soil at the edge of the new garden, Deborah caught Roger watching them, his expression unreadable. She straightened her shoulders, determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing her completely defeated. This was a strategic retreat, not a surrender. For the next hour, Deborah Winters, seven-term HOA president and self-appointed guardian of community standards, knelt in the dirt alongside Lily, planting sunflower seeds in neat, precise rows. Her cream-colored pants acquired smudges that would never fully wash out. Her manicured nails collected soil beneath them. And somewhere, in a corner of her mind she rarely visited, a long-dormant memory stirred of her grandmother's garden, wild and abundant, where rules mattered less than the simple joy of growing things. By mid-morning, the community garden had taken shape with remarkable speed. Someone had brought folding tables where people gathered to map out plots and assign responsibilities. Gerald Thompson was organizing a watering schedule. The Hendersons, whose empty lot had been transformed, moved through the crowd like celebrities accepting congratulations for their generosity. Deborah finished her planting and stood, brushing soil from her hands. Roger approached, offering her a bottle of water. "Truce?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. She accepted the water, but not the sentiment. "This isn't over, Roger. There are protocols, permits. The county has regulations about community gardens." "Already handled," he replied smoothly. "Remember Bill Chen, Lily's father? He works for the county planning department. Turns out he was quite motivated to help after those Christmas decoration cetaceans." Deborah took a long drink of water to mask her frustration. When she lowered the bottle, she noticed a group of board members huddled together, occasionally glancing in her direction. Their expressions were not encouraging. "You've been planning this for months," she said, realization dawning. "The helicopter landing, the towing company, all of it was to distract me while you organized this coup." Roger chuckled. "I wouldn't call it a coup. More of a community correction, and the helicopter was genuinely for my son's visit. Your reaction just provided an opportunity to accelerate our timeline." He gestured toward the bustling garden. "Look around, Deb. People are happy. They're connecting. Isn't that what community is supposed to be about?" Before she could form a suitably cutting response, her phone chimed with a distinctive tone, the one reserved for official HOA communication. She pulled it from her pocket, frowning at the notification. "Emergency Board Meeting today, 3 p.m., Community Center." The center was Gerald Thompson. Deborah's head snapped up, searching for Gerald among the crowd. She found him watching her, his expression a mixture of determination and regret. When their eyes met, he gave a small nod before turning away. "What's this about?" she demanded, shoving the phone toward Roger. He raised his hands in a gesture of innocence. "Nothing to do with me. Board business is board business." But something in his tone told her otherwise. The fracture within her widened, sending small, spidery cracks through the foundation of her certainty. For the first time in 7 years, Deborah Winters felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. The community center meeting room had never felt so small. Deborah sat at the head of the conference table, her rightful place as president, but everything else about the emergency board meeting felt wrong. The usual stack of her meticulously prepared agenda items was absent. The board members avoided direct eye contact. Even the chair beneath her seemed to have lost its customary support. "I call this emergency meeting to order," she announced, wielding her gavel with practiced authority. "First item of business." "Actually, Deborah," Gerald interrupted, clearing his throat nervously. "The board has prepared the agenda for today's meeting." He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished table. Deborah stared at it, refusing to reach for it immediately. A power move she learned in her corporate days, never appeared too eager for information. "I'm the president," she reminded him coolly. "All agendas require my approval." "Under normal circumstances, yes," said Treasurer Williams, adjusting his glasses. "However, Section 22 of the HOA Charter allows for emergency sessions with board-approved agendas when circumstances warrant immediate action." Deborah finally pulled the paper toward her, scanning its contents with growing disbelief. There was only one agenda item. Vote of no confidence, HOA president position. The room blurred around her. 7 years of dedicated service, of 6 a.m. property inspections and midnight email responses, of fighting for property values and community standards reduced to a single line item. "This is absurd," she said, her voice unnaturally calm. "On what grounds?" The 4 board members exchanged uncomfortable glances before Secretary Jenkins spoke up. "Recent events have highlighted concerns about your leadership approach. The helicopter incident specifically." "I was enforcing the bylaws with excessive zeal," Gerald said gently, "and without board consultation. That's never been required for standard enforcement actions." "The military helicopter is hardly standard," interjected Mrs. Gonzalez, the newest board member. "And the community response to this morning's garden initiative demonstrates a clear desire for change." Deborah's hands trembled slightly. She clasped them together to still the motion. "So this is about Roger Thornhill. He orchestrates a public spectacle, violates multiple bylaws, and instead of holding him accountable, you're punishing me." "This isn't punishment," Gerald insisted. It's about the direction of our community. We've received over 200 emails since this morning, residents expressing support for the garden, offering donations, volunteering time. There's more enthusiasm than we've seen for any HOA initiative in years. Enthusiasm doesn't maintain property values, Deborah countered. Structure does. Rules do. What happens when the novelty wears off and that garden becomes an eyesore? When volunteers stop showing up? When pests invade and spread to neighboring properties? She expected nods of agreement, the usual response to her practical concerns. Instead, she was met with pitying looks. We've established a garden committee, Mrs. Gonzalez explained. Fully funded through private donations. They already scheduled maintenance rotations through the next 6 months. Roger Thornhill chairs the committee, added Gerald, almost apologetically. Of course he did. Deborah felt the last threads of control slipping through her fingers. She straightened in her chair, summoning the dignity that had carried her through countless corporate boardrooms before retirement. I see. And if I refuse to step down? The charter provides for removal by unanimous board vote in cases off, Williams began. Spare me the legalese, Deborah interrupted. I know the charter better than any of you. I helped write it. She stood abruptly, gathering her belongings. You want my resignation? Fine, but first I'd like to address the community. One final time as president. The request, or rather demand, caught them off guard. Gerald recovered first. The spring mixer is tomorrow evening. Everyone will be there. Would that be suitable? Deborah nodded curtly and headed for the door. As she reached for the handle, Gerald called after her. Deborah, what are you planning to say? She turned, allowing herself a small, enigmatic smile, the first genuine one and longer than she could remember. You'll just have to wait and see, won't you?